Hello, everyone. We're having some technical questions here today. Many new hands on the controls, so please bear with us. I hope that you are now all able to see and hear us, and that you are able to use chat, and I see a chat posting, so that's great. So here we go. All right, so good afternoon and welcome to Lunch with League. I'm Diane McNutt, and I am the president of League of Women Voters of San Jose, Santa Clara. We also serve the cities of Milpitas, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. Our purpose is to encourage informed and active participation in government and to influence public policy through education and advocacy. We do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. Each month at Lunch with League, we host a speaker who can share information and ideas that will help broaden our understanding of issues in our community and in our nation. This month, we are very pleased to welcome Todd Fries, who's the executive director of the Northern California Innocence Project. This is a nonprofit clinical program of Santa Clara University's School of Law. Its mission is to exonerate the innocent, educate future attorneys, and reform criminal justice policy. To date, the Innocence Project has won justice for 36 people who collectively have spent more than 550 years in prison. Todd began working for the Northern California Innocence Project in 2007 and has held almost every position within the organization, from research attorney to operations manager to associate director to his current job as executive director. After Todd's initial presentation, League member Barbara Marshman will pose questions that you sent in advance, as well as those that you send through chat, which hopefully continues to work through the program as they occur to you as you listen to Todd talk. So please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Todd Fries. Todd, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, take it away.
All right. Well, let me start by thanking you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm very pleased to be here. Um, so where do I begin? I'm going to begin with our mission. We have a very broad mission here at the Northern California Innocence Project, or we refer to ourselves as NCIP, so I'll probably be saying NCIP a lot throughout this presentation. But our mission is to promote a fair, effective, and compassionate criminal justice system and protect the rights of the innocent. It's broad because we believe our work affects more than just the innocent. We seek to do more than just innocence work. We seek to have an impact on the criminal legal system at large. And so we have a very broad mission for that purpose. So again, it's broad, but our mission doesn't necessarily speak to what we do or how we achieve our mission. And so we break our work into 3 general program areas and then a 4th emerging program area, which I will explain to you. So exonerate, educate, and reform. That's sort of our tagline. We exonerate because we investigate cases of wrongful conviction. Where we find evidence of innocence, we will litigate or negotiate with district attorneys' offices to help free our clients. That is the core of our work, and we're pretty darn good at it. We've helped to exonerate 36 people who collectively have spent 550 years in prison, and we have several cases that are in litigation right now, so hopefully that number will grow. We educate. We educate primarily because we are a clinical program at Santa Clara University School of Law. So law students actually help us with our cases. They take us like they would a regular class, but this is no regular class. I was a clinical student in this program many years ago, and it changed my entire career arc. It had such an impact on me. But our students learn by doing. Essentially, they do what lawyers do, and they learn their ethical responsibilities. They learn lawyering skills. It's a top-notch clinical program, not just at Santa Clara University School of Law, but across the country. It's really a respected clinical program. But beyond the clinical program, we host trainings and symposia. We just had a big symposium in March all about California's Racial Justice Act. It's on our YouTube channel if you want to check that out. We take on volunteers who also, like our students, learn by doing. And then we do speaking engagements all across the country. Our attorneys are relied upon for their expertise at conferences and programs. So we are We're speaking everywhere. You name it, we've probably spoken there before. And then finally, reform. Most of our reform work is done through legislation. NCIP is part of a larger coalition called the California Innocence Coalition that's made up of all of the innocence projects in California. There are 4 of them in total. I have a slide about that a little bit later, so I won't go into too much more detail now about that. We also do research. Just last month, I released a big research report all about eyewitness identification policies in California. So we seek to change the system through data-driven reform. And then there's this emerging area. I'm going to call it re-entry. It's client services. Now that we've helped to free 36 people, the question is, now what? Right? That's not the end of the story. Our clients, they need assistance in reacclimating back into society. And for a long time, we did this in an ad hoc way. You know, if a client needed somewhere to stay, they could stay on someone's couch. But we need to do this more methodically and really think about it. So recently we hired a client services specialist who is helping us to form this program area so that when our clients are freed, we know exactly what to do, how to make sure that they're successful. So that's what we do. But today I want to focus a little bit more on our casework, since that is the core of our work, and it's typically what people want to know the most about. But I'm open to fielding questions about anything that we do. So a little bit about the background of innocence work. The first Innocence Project started in New York in 1992, and that's around the time that DNA begins showing that wrongful convictions are a thing. Before that, there were doubts as to whether anyone was really wrongfully convicted. But with DNA, we now know that 100% this person is innocent. So with those DNA exonerations, we're able to go back, dissect the case, and figure out where things went wrong. And that's really how we figured out what the 6 main causes of wrongful conviction are, and I'll get into that just a little bit later. NCIP was started several years later in 2001. It was founded by Cookie Rodolphe and Linda Starr. You can see the black and white photo at the bottom. That's Linda Starr. She is retiring. She's still with the program. She's retiring in July, and we are very, very sad to see her go. She will be missed. But Cookie and Linda live less than a mile from our organization, and so I'm sure we'll still be seeing them plenty. There are 72 innocence projects worldwide. Each project is independent. So what I mean by that is we're separate entities. We have separate budgets, we have separate staff, separate caseloads. We're all housed at different institutions of higher learning or are standalone nonprofits. We're all separate. There is a misnomer that NCIP is just a branch of the Innocence Project. That's not how we refer to ourselves. We're separate. But we are all connected through the Innocence Network, which is really a loose affiliation of all of these projects. We get together every year. We have a big conference. We share information, but for the most part, we're all separate. And we're also all separate in the types of cases that we take on. So for instance, in New York, they only do DNA cases. If there's no DNA angle, they won't take the case. NCIP takes every type of case, whether there's DNA, whether it's just an eyewitness misidentification or a false confession. We do everything. So whatever the type of evidence of innocence is, whether it has DNA or not, we will take it on. There are 4 innocence projects in California. We are the only project in Central and Northern California. We cover the northern 48 counties. It's a very big geographic area. And then there are 3 in Southern California, 2 in Los Angeles. There's the Los Angeles Innocence Project and the Loyola Project for the Innocent, and then 1 in San Diego, which is called the Innocence Center. We all work together in coalition on legislative reform, but again, we are still all separate entities. So I want to talk to you a little bit about our process, because people always have questions about this. How do we find our cases? Where do we get our cases from? The most common way is that the potential client will write us a letter and they'll say, I'm innocent of the crime, please help me. So everything starts with a letter. And we have an intake attorney here who does an initial triage of the letter. There's typically 3 things that intake attorney is looking for when a client writes to us. Number 1, are they saying that they're innocent of the crime? We have a lot of people that write to us that need help with a civil matter, or, they want to sue the prison for poor prison conditions, or just something else that doesn't speak to their innocence. We don't take those cases. We only do innocence cases. Second thing that the intake attorney looks for is there some sort of new evidence. We need some sort of substantial new evidence to get the case back into court. So for instance, if a client writes to us and says, well, I have an alibi, but that alibi already testified at trial, the court will not reconsider that alibi. So it has to be, we need something new, something else to go on, whether it's DNA, a recanting witness. It just has to be something that a court hasn't already seen. And then finally, it needs to be in the geographic area that we cover. I'll show you a map so you can see the expanse geographic area that our organization covers. All right, so what does it mean to be innocent, right? What does it mean if someone's claiming that they're innocent? And so I have a few scenarios, and you can give me just a yes, no in the chat if you think that this qualifies as innocence. So here's the first scenario. I was in the car, I drove there, but I didn't do the crime. Is that a case we would take? You can just type in a yes or a Y or an N into the chat here so I can see what people are. No, I see a no. That would be correct. So that's not the type of case that we would take. There's something called accomplice liability. So if someone was in the car, but they didn't actually do the crime, they're just as liable if they aid and abet. So that's not the type of case that we would take on. Next scenario. I did it, but it was in self-defense. Is that innocence? Yes. Let me see some chat here. Yes, no. What do we think? Seeing a no. I'm seeing a few no's. I see a yes. So that is not actually the type of case we would take. We don't typically do self-defense cases that would require us to disprove the mens rea, which is the mental element of the crime. It's very hard to do for us to do, so not typically a case that we would take. How about this one? My sentence is excessive. What do we think about this one? I see a no. I see a no. No. So that's correct. That doesn't necessarily speak to innocence. Maybe one day we might take on cases of manifest injustice, but not the type of thing we would do right now. And then finally, I wasn't there. I didn't do it. Is that innocence? I see a yes. I see a no. Possibly. That's true. I like that. I like the possibly answer because I think there's something missing here. It should say, I wasn't there, I didn't do it, I didn't know about it, I didn't help plan it. If it were all of those things, that would be innocent. And that there's a legal term, actual innocence, and that's exactly what it means. I wasn't there, I didn't do it, I didn't know about it, I didn't help plan it, it wasn't me, I didn't do it. That is actual innocence. And those are the types of cases that we typically take on. Here's our geographic area, just so you can see it. So NCIP covers the area, everything above that line. So everything above San Luis Obispo County, Kern County, and San Bernardino County. It's 48 total counties that we cover. Again, it is a huge geographic area. That means we need to make inroads with district attorneys' offices and law enforcement in 48 different counties, and each county has several different police departments. So it's a lot of work. It requires a lot of travel. It means that our attorneys are out of their offices at days at a time, conducting investigation. And we have a lot of small rural counties. We don't have the big population centers, so we don't have LA or San Diego or Orange County. So interestingly enough, even though the geographic area we cover is bigger than the Southern California area, we get fewer requests just because we have, the counties are sparsely populated. All right, so we get our letter, it meets our initial criteria. We say, okay, we want more information. What we do next is we send that potential client a questionnaire. This is what our questionnaire looks like. It's just front and back, 2 pages. It asks just pertinent questions. When we first started this project, our questionnaire was, I think, nearly 50 pages long. And what do you think happened when we send a 50-page questionnaire to someone in prison? They don't typically come back. So over the years, we have refined our questionnaire so that it's very simple. We ask just the pertinent questions, just what we need to know to make a decision if we want to move the case on and continue investigating, or if it's not a case that we can necessarily help with. So once we get the questionnaire back, we will then do a preliminary investigation. So we'll pull appellate documents. We might talk to a former to the trial attorney just to get their sense of the case. We'll do just some general investigation. We might even visit the client at that point just to get more information. Not always at that point, though. Once we feel like this is a case we can move on, we will assign the case to an attorney for a full investigation. So when our attorney does a full investigation, they're looking for evidence of innocence. So how do we prove innocence? One way is through forensics, and the gold standard in forensics is DNA. We have several grants that support our DNA work, and so anytime DNA is left at a crime scene and it doesn't match our client, that always that's a good thing for our clients. And we've had several cases where we've gotten exonerations based on DNA left under the victim's fingernails or other DNA that's just left at the crime scene. DNA, again, is the gold standard. However, I should say that many DNA cases are drying up. It used to be, back when the Innocence Project started in 1992, DNA testing was at its infancy. So there were a lot of cases where no DNA testing was done. Nowadays, DNA testing is quite common. So the number of cases that with the number of cases where we can prove innocence through DNA is getting less and less, fewer and fewer every year. Advancements in technology is another way we can prove innocence. So what we've learned over the years is that science advances, both medical science, psychological science. We're learning new things every year. And it turns out that what we might have been thought was true, say, 20 years ago, is no longer true nowadays. So if a forensic pathologist testified that, well, you would only see these types of injuries from a 2-story fall or a car crash, that might not be true today. We're also seeing advancements in subjective-based sciences. So, for instance, like microscopic hair comparison analysis. For many years, the FBI was using this science. What they would do is they would take one hair, put it under a microscope, a hair from the crime scene, put it under a microscope, and a hair from a suspect and put it under the same microscope. They would look at the hairs with their eyes, compare the thickness, compare the color, and they would say, oh, these are a match. They come from the same person. Well, it seems ridiculous, but that's what they were doing. Fast forward 15, 20 years, and the FBI and DOJ come out and they say, whoops, we made a mistake. We might have gone beyond the limits of science, and so you should go back and look at these cases where we've used this type of testimony because someone might have been wrongfully convicted. And so that's actually what we did in California, and we were able to exonerate someone based on this bad microscopic hair comparison testimony. So with advancements in science, we're able to go back and look at some of these cases, and if there was bad expert testimony that resulted in a conviction, we're able to challenge that. So the microscopic hair comparison analysis is just an example of junk science. Another one is bite marks. We used to think that you could look at a bite mark and then get a mold of someone's teeth and put it to that bite mark and say, okay, well, this bite must have come from this person. Again, it's very subjective based. It's there's a lot of room for error, and we now know that you really can't do that. It's not a reliable science. But what if there's no physical evidence? Okay, if there's no DNA, there's no junk science. Well, there's several ways we can prove innocence. Number one, witnesses. A witness that we didn't know existed before, that saw the crime and has new testimony that a court hasn't seen. So witnesses that admitted they lied. So we have witnesses that contact us and say, you know what, I lied. I want to recant I want to recant what I said, like it was completely made up, or an adult forced me to testify to this, or law enforcement forced me to testify. So recanting witnesses is another way that we can prove someone's innocence. Again, I already talked about finding new witnesses. So just sometimes discovering things that law enforcement knew but never shared. So law enforcement and prosecutors, they have a duty to disclose any evidence that's exculpatory and material. So any type, also evidence that's impeaching, any evidence that can be used to impeach a witness. If they don't, then it's what's called a Brady violation, and a conviction can be overturned based on that withholding of this material evidence. So quite often in our cases, we'll go through a file and we'll find evidence that was just never disclosed that would have helped prove innocence. So sometimes the defense attorney makes an egregious error. This is called ineffective assistance of counsel. And defense attorneys have a duty to do what a reasonable attorney would do in that scenario. So if they know that there's an alibi witness, but they just never go investigate, or if they know that there's certain evidence that can help prove innocence and they just do nothing about it, then a conviction can be overturned based on that defense attorney's misconduct, essentially not doing what a reasonable attorney would have done in that scenario. And then finally, finding the true perpetrator. And I hesitate when I say this, because yes, finding the true perpetrator is always a good way to get a conviction overturned, but it's not the Innocence Project's job. It's not NCIP's job to find the true perpetrator. If we have evidence of innocence and we present that to a court and the court overturns the conviction, the state can retry the case. And quite often, rather than dismissing charges and letting the person go, they'll tell us, well, then who did it? We're not going to drop charges until we find the true perpetrator. And that always puts our clients in a hard place. It shouldn't be our job to find the true perpetrator. That's the job of law enforcement and prosecutors. If we present evidence of innocence and a court overturns a conviction, that should be enough to at least let our client go free. So I say finding the true perpetrator. I hesitate when I say that because I don't want to set that precedent that we need to find a true perpetrator to exonerate somebody. All right, let me tell you a little bit about the numbers. NCIP's numbers. We receive over 1,000 total letters per year. It's a lot of mail that we have to go through. We read and respond to every letter that we receive. This last year, we received 262 new requests for assistance. So that means people that had never contacted us before, people who are contacting us for the first time. Keep in mind that we've been around for more than 20 years now. So a lot of the prison population has reached out to us. So our numbers have been going down over the last several years, also because the prison population, due to realignment, has also gone down, which is a good thing. But we still receive more than 250 new requests per year. We opened 115 new case files. So that's the questionnaires that we got back and we conducted preliminary investigations into those 115 cases. And as of right now, we have about 70 active cases, 70 cases that are open, and they're all in various stages of investigation or litigation. So we're dealing with a pretty large volume of cases and letters that come in every year. Okay, so we've conducted our investigation. We find our evidence of innocence. What do we do next? We move to litigation. But, a big but, the first thing we do before we litigate a case is that we always approach the district attorney's office first. We always, because that is the most efficient avenue of relief. If we can get collaboration from the district attorney's office and they can investigate with us, it speeds up the process tenfold. So CIUs, I don't know if anyone has heard of CIUs. It stands for Conviction Integrity Units or Conviction Review Unit. Many district attorneys' offices now are creating these units in their offices. It's essentially a department of the DA's office that looks at wrongful conviction cases. And so these have been popping up across the country. There are several in California. There's one right here in Santa Clara County that we've worked with ever since they started in 2001. Um, and it's a great thing. I think it's a shift. It's a real shift in how prosecutors are looking at these cases. They're acknowledging that wrongful convictions occur. And so if there's a CIU, that's always a good thing. We can always go to them and say, hey, we think you should look at this case. We've developed really strong relationships with CIUs across the state. If our evidence of innocence is so strong, many times the district attorney won't fight it. They will concede. They will say, you know what? You've met the burden that you need to meet. We agree. We concede. We think this person should be released. That's, of course, the best case scenario. That doesn't always happen, though. We've been very successful with having concessions and collaboration, but it doesn't always happen. If it doesn't, the next thing that we do is we file what's called a petition for writ of habeas corpus. And it is the instrument that we file with the court. We basically lay out all of the new evidence and say that based on this new evidence, our client should be released. It's then up to the district attorney to respond and to say why the person should not be released. It's filed in the superior court. So that means it's filed in the same court where the person was convicted. On top of that, it's also heard by the same judge that also heard the original trial, which to me, it seems like that judge might be a little bit biased if they've already gone through a trial where someone was convicted. But that's the way the law is. As it stands, a petition for writ of habeas corpus goes before the same judge in the same court to then reassess and reevaluate the case. If the judge finds that there's something to this new evidence, they may order what's called an evidentiary hearing, which is basically like a mini trial. We get to put on witnesses, sometimes expert witnesses. The prosecution gets to cross our witnesses and put on their own witnesses. And at the end, the judge, not a jury, the judge makes a decision as to whether or not we have met the standard to get the conviction overturned. So an exoneration, what does it mean if somebody's exonerated? It means that their conviction is overturned. They're back in the position that they were before trial, which essentially means they are presumed innocent at that point. And then the state can retry the case if they want. We've never actually had a case where someone's conviction was overturned and we've gone all the way through to a retrial. We've had district attorneys' offices threaten that before, but before we get there, there's usually some sort of settlement, some sort of plea deal that might come out of it that allows our client to go free without having to go through another trial and roll the dice. Again, I've already spoken to the number of people we've helped to free and the number of years they've served in prison. So I want to talk briefly about the causes of wrongful conviction, and then I have a little exercise I want to do with you all. So these are the 6 main causes of wrongful conviction that I want to take you through. The first is false confessions. Why would anyone confess to something they didn't do? Well, there are a lot of reasons. Number one, anyone who has diminished capacity, anyone who is youth, anyone who's kept in a room for 14 hours and told that they're lying and not given any food or water. They will do anything or say anything to get out of that room. So false confessions happen, and in fact, more than 20% of wrongful convictions involve false confessions, and we've had a couple of false confession cases in our office. I want to go back. So recently, NCIP supported a bill that now prohibits law enforcement from lying to youth, anyone who's 17 or younger, from lying to them during investigations. So they can't be deceptive in any way, because often that's how they get confessions. When they fabricate evidence and say, well, your DNA was left at the scene, we found it. They can't do that anymore. So that was a huge success. That bill got passed last year. All right, next we have jailhouse informants. Jailhouse informants are people who are in prison who approach a prison guard or law enforcement and say, hey, I have information about this case, but I will only test and I will testify to that, but you need to give me some sort of deal, meaning money. It could be move me to a different cell, move me to a different prison, reduce my sentence, etc. Jailhouse informants are inherently unreliable. We're working on legislation to limit the use of jailhouse informants. And again, we have had several cases involving jailhouse informants where their lies at trial, where we were able to show that they were lying and have been able to help free our clients as a result. Next, we have faulty forensics, which I talked about briefly before. But again, this is subjective based sciences. So hair comparison, bite marks, arson science. We're learning a lot about arson and burn patterns and when you might see them and when you might not. So there's a lot of faulty forensics involving burn patterns, blood spatter. A lot of these things are just very unreliable, and people are convicted based on these unreliable sciences. So that is another main cause. Overall, the biggest cause of wrongful conviction is government misconduct. So that includes both law enforcement misconduct and prosecutor misconduct. More than 50% of the wrongful convictions that have been documented in this country involve government misconduct. So, and that can include hiding evidence, not turning over evidence, destroying evidence, all of those things. It can run the gamut. Bad lawyering, I talked about this as well. So this is ineffective assistance of counsel. This is where a defense attorney doesn't do what a reasonable attorney would have done. The key to this, though, is that even if a defense attorney doesn't do what they should have done, if it wouldn't have made a difference in the case, meaning even if the lawyer was drunk at the table and just didn't do anything, if there was an overwhelming amount of evidence and it wouldn't have made a difference in the case, you're not going to be able to get your conviction overturned based on that. So it needs to have really made a difference in the case, even if they didn't do what a reasonable attorney had done. And probably the cause that a lot of people know about, it gets a lot of press, is mistaken eyewitness identification. And I want to take you through a quick exercise here. So we're going to pretend that a penny committed a crime, and I'm the police officer. I'm going to take you through this lineup, okay? I know you've seen the penny. I know you know which penny did it. Only you can help us identify the penny. There's only one right answer. If you don't help us find the penny now, we're not going to have any other opportunities to get this penny off the streets. So please take a little bit of time, take a look at the photo lineup here, and you can just type in the chat which one is the real penny. Which penny is the criminal here? I want to see who people are picking. See an L. This is hard. A D. I see an L and a D. The Lincoln is facing different ways in those. See an I. K. An L. Okay, so it's sort of, everyone is sort of all over the place here. I'm gonna tell you which one it is. And the correct answer is, it's none of them. So anyone who picked someone has just contributed to the wrongful conviction of a penny. And this is what's called a perpetrator absent lineup. And this is one way that people get brought into crimes that they didn't commit or picked out as suspects because their photo ends up in a photo lineup, and they're picked because the witness feels pressure that they need to make a pick. We have done a lot of work, NCIP has done a lot of work around how law enforcement conducts lineups and have recently passed a law that now requires them to use certain best practices when they conduct lineups. And I didn't use any of those practices when I presented this scenario to you, but what should happen is the person conducting the lineup shouldn't know who the suspect is, or in this case, I guess, know who the suspect is not. Um, I should have given you pre-lineup instructions saying that the penny may or may not be in the lineup, that you shouldn't feel compelled to pick anyone, and that regardless of whether or not you pick someone, the investigation will continue. Essentially, it removes the pressure from the witness from making a pick. The fillers should all match. The fillers actually look pretty good here. The fillers are all of the people that are not the suspect. The filler should resemble the witness's description of the suspect. So these all look pretty similar, so that's pretty good. The whole process should be recorded, video recorded and audio recorded, so that when it's presented to a jury, they can see what actually happened during the process. And if best practices weren't followed, it can be challenged by the defense. And if best practices were followed, the prosecution can say, look, jury, all best practices were followed. This is a good identification. And then finally, what law enforcement should do is get a certainty statement, meaning once a pick is made, they should ask, how certain are you of that pick? And write down what the witness says verbatim. And that's because if they just write down, okay, they made a pick, and then a jury sees that, okay, they made a pick, if the person was 65%, the jury would want to know that. You know, making a pick and being 65% sure are different things. So these are the best practices now that law enforcement is required to use, and we're monitoring law enforcement to make sure they're actually using them. I know that I'm running short on time, so I want to move through this real quickly, but the umbrella cause of wrongful conviction is cognitive bias. And that's just that I think most of the time, law enforcement, prosecutors, they're trying to do the right thing. They feel like they know what happened. They feel like they're doing the right thing, but they get so used to looking at things in a certain way that they miss things. It's called confirmation bias, that you acknowledge the things that fit your theory, that confirm your theory of the case, and you sort of dismiss the ones that don't. So here's a little activity I like to do. Can you count the F's that you see in the sentence? I'll give you 10 seconds to do it. You can just type it in the chat real quickly. 6. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you said 6, that's pretty good. Most people say 3 because they overlook the F's in the ofs. Or they say 3 because they overlook the F's in the ofs. So that test didn't work too well. But I want to give you just some general numbers so you know the scope of the problem. There's a website called the National Registry of Exonerations. They track exonerations nationwide. They use 1989 as a start because that's when the first DNA-based exoneration happened. So that is sort of the start of where they measure these. But there have been more than 3,500 exonerations nationwide, both DNA and non-DNA cases. There have been 286 just in California since 1989. 597 exonerated as a result of DNA testing. I like to include this number because it shows that DNA cases are just a small fraction of the overall number. There's a misnomer that if you don't have DNA, you can't exonerate someone. It's just not true. DNA cases are just a small percentage of the overall total. Actually, this should be 15 years. I need to update this, but at least for NCIP's clients, the average length of incarceration has been 15 years. If you look nationwide, it's closer to a decade, but that's a long time to spend in prison before your conviction can be overturned. The years lost nationwide, 31,900 years lost, years that people have spent wrongfully incarcerated. And then I want to point this out as well. 50% of the exoneree population is African American. And when you compare that to the African American population in the US, it's 13%. So the numbers are skewed here, just as they are in almost every aspect of the criminal legal system. Here's some of our students in our clinic, um, which I talked about. We advocate for legislative reform, which I talked about. Currently, this legislative season, we're co-sponsoring one bill, which improves our writ of habeas corpus statute. And then we are working on our re-entry program. So that includes, finding a place to live, getting compensated, because our clients are entitled to compensation for their years of wrongful incarceration. It's $140 a day. It's not guaranteed. It's an overly complicated process that sometimes leaves some of our clients without compensation. And so that's a whole nother issue in itself. And then we have our clients, who are just the most resilient people that you will ever meet. I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but here, this is Lionel Rubalcava. Yesterday, we celebrated his 5th anniversary of his exoneration. His case was right here in Santa Clara County. He has a civil rights lawsuit pending against the city and police of San Jose. Up here we have Frankie Carrillo. He's currently running for assembly down in Los Angeles. It's an amazing story. If you're interested in his case, if you go on to Netflix, there's a series called Innocence Files. He's episode 4 and 5 of that series. Just an amazing case. I could talk all day about our clients, but I know that I'm running short on time. I want to be able to address your questions, and so I think with that, I will. Well, our clients are amazing. Here's some of our artwork, some of the artwork that our clients have sent us from prison. We had an art exhibit several years ago, and we'll probably do another. We'll probably do another one soon, because we have so many amazing pieces of art that our clients send us as thank yous for the work that we do. So I'm gonna end there, and I apologize for having to rush through the end, but I want to be able to answer any questions that people have.
Thank you very much, Todd. I don't seem to be, I've enabled my video, but I don't know how to make, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Oh wait, now you're muted again.
Okay, now I'm not. I'm just trying to, but you don't have to see me. You're the important one. This is really impressive, and as I told you just before we went online, that I have a good friend, Karen Sununu, who some of you probably know, was a longtime assistant DA in Santa Clara County. And when she retired, turned innocence lawyer, and actually was instrumental in achieving the exoneration of a suspect who is now free. But it's free since 2020, but there's still litigation on compensation. Todd, can you talk a little bit about that? Once there is an exoneration, what are the circumstances that can keep people from being oh, sorry, I was distracted here by something. From being compensated? What are the factors?
So if a judge overturns a conviction, and when they overturn it, if they say this person is factually innocent of the crime, they need to actually use those words, factually innocent, then the person is automatically entitled to compensation. So that is the key. They need to be found factually innocent by the court.
Okay.
If the court does not declare them factually innocent when the conviction is reversed initially, you can go back and file a motion for a finding of factual innocence, and the court can then grant it at that time. If they don't grant it at that time, then what you do is you have to file a claim with the California Victim Compensation Board. and they will look at the case, and essentially they will have another mini trial. They will put the standard that you need to prove to get compensation in California is less than it would be for a criminal case.
Mhm.
But you still need to put on a case to again prove that you are innocent of the crime.
Okay.
And it's just an added burden that our clients shouldn't have to go through. We've done a lot of legislative reform on this because it used to be 3 years ago and prior, it used to be that you would have to prove your case and you'd have to show that you were innocent by a preponderance of the evidence. That means that the petitioner, the client, would have to put on a whole case and show, look, this is why I'm innocent. And it turns out that's really hard to prove. And what was happening is that this administrative body, the California Victim Compensation Board, would deny the claims. So what we did to change that, and has improved things immensely, is to change who has the burden of proof. So instead of now the petitioner having to prove that they're innocent, it's now on the AG, who's the opposing party in these compensation claims. They have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the person is guilty. So because of that, because we've now switched the burden, the AG's office is not challenging us on these cases. When we file the claim, they're more likely to say, you know what, compensate the person. We're not gonna challenge it. So it has made a really, really big difference. And so it's not a perfect system, but it is better than it was. $140 a day is not enough money. There's some states, like in Texas, of all places, they have double the amount. It's $280 a day that they get. So we should up the amount, particularly for inflation. But that's what's going on with compensation. Beyond that, beyond the compensation claims, some of our clients have an opportunity to file a civil rights case. So if there was law enforcement misconduct or prosecutor misconduct, they can sue the police department, the prosecutor's office, and that's really where some of these you'll find these big settlements, these $10-15 million settlements. And we have several clients right now that are in the midst of civil litigation, civil rights suits.
How successful have you or Innocence Projects in general been in pushing reform of police departments? I mean, some of these things, like ignoring evidence, withholding evidence. There's an alibi and it never comes out. Is there a change in procedures underway because of these cases, or are they just seen as individual problems?
No, we've had tremendous success in
Okay.
reforming police department processes. As I mentioned before, around eyewitness identification, they're now mandated, and we fought for eyewitness identification reform for 20 years. We wanted law enforcement to use these certain best practices that science shows reduce misidentifications. And law enforcement fought us for years because the argument was, we need to be able to conduct investigations the way that we know how to do it. And this is critical evidence in these cases. And even if it means that, someone gets wrongfully convicted every now and then, it's, we need the freedom to do that. And that shouldn't be the case. That just shouldn't be the case. And so it just so happened in 2018, the winds were in the right direction for us to bring that legislation, because we had tried several times before, 4 other times, and each time it either died in committee or it was vetoed by Governor Schwarzenegger twice. So we got that in place. And again, like the anti-deception bill that we helped pass a couple of years ago, that now prohibits law enforcement from lying to youth when they're interrogating them. We have several cases where children have made accusations against people because they were lied to about what certain evidence was. And so that has a very big effect on how law enforcement conducts investigations. And the true impact, I think, won't be seen. We won't see it probably until a few years out. until we see that there's a reduction, that misidentifications are not happening as frequently as they were because of misidentifications or false accusations or false confessions.
A couple of folks have asked about Prop 47. Has that had an impact on your work in any way? It's not exactly, okay,
We haven't seen an impact on our work,
okay,
Prop 47 at all.
okay. What am I doing here?
I know that
Oh,
one of the, oh, sorry, go on.
go ahead. No,
I was going to
please.
say, I know that one of the questions that someone had presented ahead of time is how they can help, what they can do.
Yes.
Um, and so I just wanted to address that. There are a few ways. Number one, first and foremost, donate. We are a clinical nonprofit. We have to raise $1.5 million every year to pay for our staff. Even though we're university employees, we fund ourselves. So while they give us a beautiful office space, the salaries and operating costs all come from us. Um, the other thing, a couple of other things that people can do. Number two, sit on a jury. People are all, when they get called for jury duty, it's always like, oh, I don't want to go. How can I get out of it? But we need educated people on juries. It's really important, and it will help. It will prevent the next person from being wrongfully convicted if we have educated people on juries who understand that this can happen. Um, Another thing is know who your DA is. Get involved in those races. Understand DAs hold a lot of power. They have prosecutorial authority and discretion, and know who they are. Know what their policies are, because that can make a big difference in whether or not someone's prosecuted for a crime they didn't commit. Follow us on social media. I don't know how many people have Facebook accounts or Instagram accounts, but we're always putting stuff out on our social media channels about events that we're doing, speaking engagements we're doing, galas that we're holding, and just general information about our work. I think those are the main ways. You can also volunteer, though volunteer opportunities are somewhat limited only because we have a small staff and it's kind of a niche area of law that we work in. So it's hard to oversee a whole volunteer program, but we do have some volunteers that come in to assist.
Have you been able to quantify where in the system most of the problems occur? For instance, is it more on the police end or the prosecutorial, or is there any judgment of where a major problem is?
Well, I think the biggest problem would be on the prosecutor side because, like I said, they're the ones that have the discretion as to
Mhm.
whether or not to prosecute a case. So they can go back and look at how an investigation was conducted. If they feel like it wasn't conducted according to best practices, if they feel like something's not right, they don't have to prosecute. If they feel like the medical evidence that they're getting from their doctors is outdated, or there have been advancements in science, you know there are some progressive prosecutors who will not prosecute because they don't feel 100% comfortable in the science that's used. And so I think that's where, if we're gonna, I don't want to say put blame, but if we're going to focus on one area where we need a cultural shift, it would be in prosecutors' offices. And I think that is happening. I think that's starting to happen. Um, I think as people, as young lawyers know and recognize that wrongful convictions happen, they take that with them into these new positions. And I think that will change the culture. It has to come from the top down. So as some of the longtime prosecutors start to move out and some of the younger ones move up and they recognize this is a problem, that it will have an impact on our work.
We have heard a lot over time about the problems of identification and those exercises. There are many you can do. It just shows we don't have the ability to carry that kind of memory for the most part. Is there sufficient limitation in the law now on using lineup identification or a photo identification on as a strong basis for prosecution?
I would say uh, here's the problem. Even though we have these practices that should be in place, what our research has shown is that the policies that police departments are using actually don't comply with the law. And
Mm.
so we did a huge research project after the law was passed to go to ask police department. We did a massive Public Records Act request, and we asked police departments to provide us their policies, um, to show us what they are so that we know, so that we can be sure that they were implemented. What we found was that more than 90% of the agencies had policies that didn't comply with the law. And that's because all of their policies were produced by a for-profit company called Lexipol. I don't know if anyone has heard of Lexipol before, but they have essentially, what has happened here is they have privatized this public function, and Lexipol creates policies for public safety agencies, but they do it in a way so that it meets the very minimum scrutiny, so that they're legally defensible, but they don't actually improve public safety. And so we're working with Lexipol to get them to modify their policies. Basically, what they've done is everywhere in the statute where it says officers shall do X, Y, and Z, they have changed the language to say officers should, but not that they shall. So they've essentially made some of these practices discretionary. And I think it's problematic. And we've seen it be a problem, not in eyewitness identification, but in use of force. And I just know that it's gonna happen because an officer is gonna read that and say, well, it's not really required. It says should. I did my
Right.
best. I couldn't do it. And so therefore I don't need to comply.
Right. It seems it's astonishing to me that those interpretations of the law can be so prevalent when they're clearly not the intent of the original legislation. There's nothing legally to do about that private company interpreting legislation.
Well, things are building. There might be a class action or something somewhere in the future, but there have been this Lexipol is they're very good about protecting themselves. Um,
Mhm.
so they haven't actually been a party to one of these suits, but there have been several police departments that were sued because of their Lexipol policies. And I think that the
Mm.
more that these lawsuits happen, the more pressure it will put on Lexipol to, you know what, if the law says it's mandatory, let's just use the proper language so that we're protecting ourselves, but and protecting the community. But it hasn't happened yet.
If you identify false confessions in a case, does anything automatically happen to the officers who compelled that forced confession? Is there does your work ever result in disciplinary action?
In theory, it could. In reality, it's never happened. And I think the main reason is because law enforcement and prosecutors generally do not like to prosecute their own. It happens very infrequently. There was a law passed 3 or 4 years ago that says that prosecutors can now be criminally charged for misconduct in the course of their job. And that, people celebrated that as, oh wow, now prosecutors won't necessarily,
Yeah.
they won't do, they won't commit misconduct anymore. No one's actually ever been prosecuted in
Right.
California for
Who
that.
would prosecute them?
Right. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Just we're probably running a little bit low on time here, but I'm just curious. You mentioned other states doing this. Is there are there states that you've been able to conclude are worse than others at false conviction, or is that impossible to say because innocent projects are different in every state?
Well, I mean, there are certainly hotbeds of wrongful conviction, and I'll mention two in particular. One of them is Louisiana, particularly New Orleans. There are several prosecutors who were, in fact, Harry Connick Sr. was the district attorney of New Orleans Parish for a long time, and there were several wrongful convictions under his tenure, including one who was days away from being put to death until evidence of wrongful conviction was brought to light. His name was John Thompson. You can look him up, and he tried to sue the prosecutor's office for his wrongful conviction. He was granted, I think, $38 million, but it went to the Supreme Court, and what the Supreme Court decided was that prosecutors have absolute immunity when it comes to civil liability for these cases. So he got nothing. But he's a great person. He passed away a few years ago, but an amazing story. There's several books and documentaries about him, but John Thompson was his name. The other hotbed I want to say is Chicago.
Mm,
Boy, there's a lot. There have been several mass exonerations there because of law enforcement and prosecutor misconduct.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Chicago just never goes away as an example of odd behavior.
Yeah.
Thank you. Our time is up. It's a little bit past.
Okay.
So thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Todd. I was thinking about the scales of justice as you talked, because it feels like it's depressing to hear these stories of people that are wrongfully incarcerated. On the other hand, it's inspiring and hopeful that there are places like the Innocence Project looking out for their interests. So thank you so much for being here and for giving us a little glimpse into your very important work. I also want to give a special shout out to Marie Arnold, League member, who's not here today, but she's the one who suggested this program. And I'm glad that we recorded it so that she'll have a chance to see it later. I'm sure she'll be very pleased. So virtual applause for everyone for Todd and for Barbara's work here today.
Thank you.
Couple of
Can I
announcements.
make one last plug? Just to go to our YouTube page, if you want to see great videos and stories about our clients that show their true resilience, because I don't feel like that came through in this presentation. Our clients are the most amazing people you will ever meet, the most resilient. I'm blessed to do this work and to know them. I would not necessarily have known them in the regular course of my life and my work, and I just feel blessed to have them in my life. So go to our YouTube page and check it out. And now,
Thank you. We certainly do that. So we do have a couple more events coming up. We have our annual meeting for our league is scheduled for Saturday, June 8th from 10 to 12. And it's going to be on Zoom. Before we do our business meeting, we will have a speaker, and that's going to be Ann Ravel, past chair of the Federal Election Commission and past chair of the California Fair Practices Commission. And her topic is the provocative question, is American democracy backsliding? And she's going to talk about attacks on America's electoral processes, the impact of dark money in elections, and what she has learned as an international election observer. That meeting is going to be open to the public, and I hope that you'll be able to attend whether you are a league member or not. Although if you're not a league member, I do encourage you to join. We also have another Lunch with League coming up in July. That'll be the third Thursday of July on July 18th with Stanford professor Sam Weinberg discussing how to navigate misinformation online. Topic that seems to get more difficult every day. That will also be 12 to 1 on Zoom. So look for more details about these events and other upcoming activities in our newsletter, in our e-blast, and on our website, lwvsjsc.org. And you can also click on that to join or to make a donation. So again, thank you all for being here today. Thank you for your great questions. And thank you, Todd and Barbara, for a great program.
thank you.